What's up guys, welcome back to Outwood Games. Thomas here, and today I wanted to talk about kind of the weird situation we're in with 10th edition potentially coming to an end this summer, and what should we be doing kind of in the interim. If all the speculation is true, and Games Workshop follows the 3-year cycle that they have been over the last couple of editions, we are expecting to see 11th edition kicking off in July. As of the time of recording and when this releases, the current theory is that they will be announcing it at Adepticon at the end of March. This would effectively mean that we have about 4-ish months remaining, about 16 weeks give or take, of the edition. And once they make that potential announcement in a couple of weeks, we'll have even less time remaining with 10th edition. With so little time remaining, it's kind of easy to think, what should we be doing with that time? For those of us that are currently invested in the hobby, maybe you already have a full 2,000 point force of at least one faction, what should you be doing? If you already have a little bit more than 2,000, you could look at expanding your collection with the end of season campaigns that they have going. There's been quite a few Battle Force boxes that have been released that will either supplement your stuff, or if you're also someone that is potentially looking at a new army, that could actually be a great way to springboard you into that faction with some of these new kits. But what should you be doing? Obviously, we want to make sure that what we do in the hobby is kind of pushing us toward, our ultimate end goal and that sort of thing. And obviously that's going to be different for a lot of us. For me, I'm kind of just working on my army for 11th edition, which is Chaos Knights, and then also just kind of filling in some gaps and improving my collection for Tyranids as well as Tau. But for you watching, you may be new to the hobby, and it's a very interesting point for you right now, because why should you invest in the current edition if it's potentially going to be no longer valid in a few weeks or months? What does that look like for you? And that's kind of more the focus of today's video. So for those of you that are brand new to the hobby, or maybe starting a new faction, and therefore going to be new with that faction in the next edition, I think there's a couple things that we're going to be looking out for in at least the short term. As I mentioned before, it sounds like the typical announcement is during the Adepticon event, and that's going to be the last weekend in March. And if it is different than that, I'll just show the dates for that now. Basically, the past few times that we've transitioned into the next edition, this is when Games Workshop has announced the upcoming edition. As it stands now, the theory is that 10th edition codexes, detachments, and everything are going to just carry into 11th, and then 11th edition is going to be sort of a soft reset of 10th edition with some minor core rules changes and potentially some, basically an additional kind of balanced data slate and that sort of thing. That's the theory though. What could happen is that 11th ends up being a full refresh and then everything gets sent to index. And so really right now, I wouldn't recommend, which is something I would normally recommend, is your codex. Right now, I would say just use like Army Recruiter, New Recruit, those sort of online resources to look up your data sheets and work your options to consider for your new army. But honestly, I might not even attach War Gear yet, because who knows what 11th edition may bring. So if you're not going to buy the codex, then what should you buy? Well, I would say focus on sort of the cornerstone pieces of the army as it is now, because those are very unlikely to change in the next edition. So things like your battle line units, potentially your epic heroes, and your character models, those are very unlikely to change from edition to edition. Unless, of course, this is kind of the big star here, if your faction is an older faction or uses older kits. Something like Custodes is probably pretty safe, but they do have the new kits for 30k that are coming out that have been said to be roughly the same scale to be used in 40k. But for a faction like Grey Knights, for example, it's almost a joke at this point how old a lot of those kits are. So we are expecting to see an 11th edition, potentially. It's still rumor, speculation, that sort of thing. So take it with what you will. But it's rumored that in 11th edition, the Grey Knights may get a full range refresh, where we'll have super sick new models for them that are scaled for Primaris size and otherwise. But that's just speculation. Obviously, a lot of this is going to be that way because we simply don't know what they are going to be doing, and it could still be another year or so before we see that refresh happen. So if you're really gunning for Grey Knights, I would wait at least until the Adepticon announcement, if not until the launch of the edition, to see if there's any further rumors that come that more iron out that is coming. Outside of those armies with much older models, I think right now focus on your heroes, your characters, your battle line units, and some of the more maybe newer kind of models in ranges, and you should be fairly safe. Another one of my big mantras is to build and paint what you want to paint. And with that, I would say if what you're really wanting to do is heavily tied to a very niche detachment. So for example, with Tyranids, you may be really thinking about that subterranean assault force, which would be all your burrowing units, so your Raveners, your Molochs, your Trigons, and that sort of thing. It's a really cool detachment. I've really been kind of holding back on collecting towards that detachment just because I know that 10th is coming to an end, and I didn't want to get those units and it end up being redacted going into 11th edition. Depending on what the announcement is for Adepticon and what they say is going to happen at 11th edition, I may end up collecting into those that detachment a bit more because I know it's pretty safe. These are models that I want, and I could potentially get, you know, a few games of this in before potentially the Tyranids Codex releases. But for you as a newer player, I would say keep what you're collecting more general. Collect things that you like, obviously. Get the cool thing, get the awesome, you know, Norn Emissary and stuff like that. But if you have any wants that are very niche or very kind of out there, I would just take a look at what's being played right now and see if it's something that might have legs to be able to be more supported in the next edition, or if you're fine with getting a model that may end up being somewhat of what you may call a dead unit in the next edition, but it's something that you really want and you really want to have it in your collection, then definitely do that. But as with anything, I mean, anything you get right now could end up being very undersupported in the next edition, and we don't necessarily want our models to sit on the shelves collecting dust and that sort of thing. So I would say if you're going to be cautious about it, stick with your battle line characters and just general support models that are pretty much always going to be supported. For Space Marines, this is obviously your Intercessors, probably your Terminators, your characters, and the like. Those aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Things like potentially the Land Raider and Rhino, those are quite old, and people are speculating they may get refreshes in the new year. And also for Space Marines and Orcs, potentially, it's rumored that they're going to be the battle box kind of opening for 11th edition. So there's going to be a big kickoff kit that'll have a lot of units for both those sides. So if you're thinking about starting Space Marines, I might consider holding off and seeing what the launch box is going to be for 11th. Because if it's going to be very useful to you, it may be worth it just to hold off, wait for that set to be spoiled and released, and then start your collection there. Split it with a friend that's thinking about doing Orcs, and you're off to the races. But also, even if you just buy the big box, take the Space Marine stuff out, you can usually sell the other half and get half of what you paid for back at the very least. If you are just starting out and maybe you already have some models, then I wouldn't bank too much on learning all the ins and outs of 10th edition just yet. I might just play some smaller games with friends just to get an idea of the pacing of 40k. It's very unlikely they're going to switch away from the I go, you go activation system where basically each player activates all their units in one side and then the other player does the same, and then we move into the next round. That's probably not going anywhere. Also, the roll to hit, roll to wound, roll to save is likely not going away either, because that's just how it's been for quite a few editions with 40k. So getting the use and the hang of that is also good. Probably what we'll see the most changes of from that sort of thing is likely just how stratagems are, probably not how they're done. You're likely still to have your command points, spend those command points towards stratagems, and go about it that way. But it is possible that stratagems are going to change. There may be some different triggers and kind of interactions and that sort of thing with those. But outside of that, I would wager that 11th edition from a gameplay perspective is probably going to be very similar to 10th. So I would just kind of get the hang of how 10th edition feels. I wouldn't worry too much about getting the nitty gritty details of each rule kind of ironed out, because those little bitty details could change in the next edition. And some of the rules that a lot of people kind of complain about, they may find their way out and that sort of thing. So keep that in mind while you're starting to play and that sort of thing, that stuff could change, but overall turn structure and how you resolve attacks and saves and that sort of thing likely will not. So feel comfortable learning those, get the hang of how to like quicken that, move it a little faster and that sort of thing. And then when 11th edition comes, all you'll be doing is implementing those slight changes that they're going to have for the new edition. Like I said before, 11th edition could be a full relaunch, a full refresh, and we could see brand new rules that really shake up 40k and that sort of thing. And that brings me into my next portion of someone that, you know, you may be newly starting, you may be considering starting a new army, and right now is actually a great time to kind of wait, but also be ready for that. Because with new editions, depending on what the speculations are and what it's going to look like, some people are inevitably going to be leaving the hobby, or they may just be changing their army altogether. And that's going to mean people may be selling their collections online for much less than what it would be for MSRP and that sort of thing. So if there's an army that you're really thinking about and you want to hold off for a little bit, then it's not a terrible time to, you know, take a breather, maybe just pick up a kit or two just to kind of feed that urge to do some hobbying. But, you know, there may be a player in your area or on eBay that has decided they don't want their Leagues of Votan army anymore, and that's the army you want, and you're going to be able to snatch that up for a much lower price. Sure, the models may already be painted or assembled, but for the most part, you'll be able to strip that paint off very easily and repaint to your desire, and you'll have, at the very least, you'll have a force to be able to play with right at the start of the edition and be able to do that. And obviously, after the edition starts, there's going to be people that end up not liking it. And while yes, you can still play 10th edition, you'll still have all your books and everything if you played in the current edition. And if you have a play group that wants to stay in 10th edition, you can play it for eternity. It doesn't matter the edition changes and that sort of thing. As long as you're playing with the rules you agree with your friends, you're going to be okay. But for those of us that are likely going to cycle with the new editions, that is an unfortunate truth that, you know, you may have friends that really wanted to stay in 10th edition, and they may go out and find either a group to do that, or they may just realize that they don't want to continue with the hobby and they'll be selling their stuff and that sort of thing. It is sad when people leave the hobby for various reasons, but it's just a reality of it, right? It's a rotation kind of format, and at rotation, a lot of people won't stick around. I hope that all of your friends stick around with it and you're able to play with them, or at the very least, you're hooked into a shop that's going to follow with rotation and be able to, you know, meet and play with new people and that sort of thing. So yeah, right now we're in an odd spot with collecting and that sort of thing. It's arguably one of the better times to start collecting 40k, but honestly, it's probably one of the worst times to start list building for 40k. So build your collections up, get your new models that you want and want to be ready for 11th edition, and just enjoy doing that. Enjoy doing the hobby and learning, you know, what those new units do and that sort of thing. But be ready for 11th edition and be ready to put those into whatever new points array and list building techniques that 11th edition is going to bring and that sort of thing. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you think now's a good time to start collecting with all these new boxes and everything? Or are you holding out until the 11th edition has officially been announced and what, basically, some more speculation on what that's going to look like? I really appreciate your support and your comments down below. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.